Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Wine with Jimmy interview. Delighted to have on board Johan. Hello, Johan. How you doing?
I'm very good, thanks, Jimmy. It's
So
nice and sunny day here, so very good.
it is. It is here as well. We've got backdrops, haven't we, with this beautiful light shining through. It's a stellar day here as well. I'm really happy to have you on board, Johan, because we are going to talk specifically in this interview about Pinotage, but I would love to go into a little bit of detail about you to begin with, and then Spier, of course, historically speaking. For
Mm.
everybody out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So if you do have any comments to questions, you can pop that in the comment section below. If you have a question for Johan or for myself, I can always pass it on. Maybe you've been to Stellenbosch, maybe you have something to say about Pinotage, your favorite expressions, favorite vintage of Spier, for example. Please do get in touch. Make sure you click like and subscribe as well. So, Johan, you have been a part of the Spier makeup for 18 years now as a winemaker, part of the furniture we were joking about earlier. Please tell us a little bit about your history and how you happened to sort of work for Spier. And then eventually, if you could start talking about Spier as well in its historical context.
Yes, thank you, Jimmy. I'm a lad that grew up in a vineyard, on a vineyard farm environment, about 80 kilometers east from here, which is in another valley. We often in South Africa refer to the other side of the mountain.
Yeah.
That's the Bredekloof region.
Mm-hmm.
Which is predominantly fruit-forward wines, really good value wines, and some really amazing Chenin Blancs coming from that area now that's quite ageable.
Yeah.
So that's my roots. I go back there as often as I can, which is nowadays not that much anymore. I'm quite busy. And yeah, I've been at Spier for 18 years, and I don't know whether I always wanted to be a winemaker, but you don't always choose your own destiny. Sometimes it just happens. So I've been very fortunate to start here in 2007 after making some wine for Spier at the winery I was working at. And things escalated very quickly. I took over the head winemaking job at Spier at the winery. And of course, we're a little bit of a fragmented business where we crush fruit as well as we buy bulk wine. Mm-hmm. Where we work in very close association with that winemakers and growers. So we at Spier, our sort of office jargon is we want to be in control of our whole supply chain. So therefore we're quite a big team. I mean, I'm heading up the team as the cellar master, and we've got a viticulturist, Benny. I've got 4 more winemakers, 1 for organic wine, 2 for white wine, and 2 for red wine for different segments. So yeah, therefore, I mean, if you look at Spier from the outside, we always look like a big operation. Mm-hmm. But for us, it's about intent. So we make wine with intent. If wine is made for a 10 quid price point, it should be what it should be, what the market expects for that. And if it's a 50 quid price point, it's super crafted. It is well taken care of. It's well groomed in the vineyard. And we can do it year after year. So we are farmers as much as we are winemakers, as much as we are wine merchants. So quite a collective. So Spier started back in 1692, as you can see from the label very often. We also just have going through a label or a calligraphy change, if I can call it that. It's still Spier. It's still 1692, but the calligraphy has changed, the font. A little bit more, I think, maybe a little bit more serious as opposed to the fluid font that it was. And maybe
Johan, for all those historians out there, this is fascinating, the fact that you have 1692, because Jan van Riebeek planted vines. That would be, what, about 1670, something like that?
Was planted 1656. So that's history of grapes at the Cape. Arrived 1652, first grapes planted 1656, first harvest 1659 on the 2nd of February.
Yep.
And
Oh,
presumably
that's
from
when he
Hemel-en-Aarde,
had
but
that's when he had that phrase, didn't he? Say, "Praise be, there are now
yeah,
grapes grown in the Cape," right?
first crush. And then after that, vines became more prolific as they pushed out from the Cape, into the hinterland of Stellenbosch and Franschhoek and
Yep.
Paarl, Wellington. So then Spier was granted as a farm in 1692 to a German settler who was part of the Dutch East India Company fleet. He was a drummer boy, a gentleman called Arno Jans, quite Dutch,
Yeah.
quite German rather. And since then, there's been a couple of families that own Spier, and the current family that owns it in their personal capacity bought the farm in 1992. So, all 300 years later. And the philosophy of this family, as it is part of the Spier philosophy, is to be great caretakers of the land. We must build up our practices that it's much more regenerative. We must revive soils. We mustn't. That's what we do. It's not a
Yeah.
must. It's
Yeah.
our DNA. We want to farm softer. We want to not necessarily all organic, but we want to make sure that what we found, we leave in a better state after 30, 40, 50 years after our cycle have passed.
Yep.
So yeah, rich history, ever evolving winemaking and farming, and people. I mean, it takes a lot of people to make this business work. So we look after our people as much as we can, and bring them along on this journey that we're all on.
And Johan, you've got, as you mentioned, 300 years of history when the latest family comes in.
Yeah.
Those numbers are absolutely mind expanding for a lot of people that don't know that much about wine, because they, of course, will have expectations that Italy and France have made wine for millennia.
Yeah.
But where do you sit on the phrase, which is South Africa is the oldest New World country? Do you scorn that phrase and go, "Oh, it's not a New World country, it's an Old World country"? How do you feel about it?
I'm quite impartial. For people, as you say, it's mind
Very
expanding.
diplomatic.
For people to grasp that, you need context. And context is for me often created by tasting or drinking or experiencing. So,
Mm,
we've been told that the New World phrase and the Old World phrase is not really the nice things to say anymore. But for me, stylistically, South Africa is not in the Old World, and it's also not in the New World.
right.
South Africa is that bridge gapping style where there is fruit like the younger styles present, but there's also austerity and ageability and resilience that the old world sort of presents. So we're not trying to bridge that gap. It naturally happened like that because of our climate and also our influence, winemaking influence mostly from France, I'd say,
Mhm.
and the varietal composition as well is mostly French.
Yeah, I remember doing quite a bit of research for my South African series on Wine with Jimmy, and to help people with their their studies and so on. And I was learning about all of those Huguenots that were fleeing persecution, and that list, that charter of some of the first names of grape growers that come out, and you would see names like de Villiers, for example, which has been a very common namesake throughout the Western Cape, going through sports as much as it does through viticulture as well. So I love the fact you've got that connection. You can clearly see in a lot of that old literature that the French influence, which is less of an influence linguistically today, but the French influence in terms of viticulture was absolutely imperative in the early days and still up to today, right?
That's right. My name is Jordan today, or Jordaan, which is a Dutch version of Jordan, but the French name is Jordaan. So my family came here in 1688 with the Huguenots. So I'm proper African. I didn't get here since the 1820s or the later dates when there were also groups of people that arrived. So and the French influence, it's still very viable today because we buy barrels from there. So we often go and visit the prolific regions from France. But of course, also the rest of Europe, Spain, Rioja, Portugal.
Yep.
So that's also South African winemakers sort of we're fortunate to be that we can travel because we market our wines as winemakers with our colleagues. Um, we do get to taste wines from around the world, even in South Africa, either bringing them back or hosting workshops. So I guess the edge from us being, back to your comment of the newest old wine country, uh, is we're always curious. We obviously not that established in the market. So we've been in the free market since 1992. So we actually, although we're an old producer, we're a young country in the mind's eye, or in the,
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
tongue,
yeah.
if I can call it that. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole sort of political, social, economical issues that South Africa had in the 20th century, right? Certainly from the aftermath of the British as well. There was a
Mm,
lot of problems around wine with KWV's monopoly and so on, and a lot of the exposure to the wine, was not global, was not exported, but that movement since the early 1990s has
mm,
been great. And for me personally, I've been coming out to South Africa for now about 14, 15 years, and just the changes in that time have been absolutely eye-opening, exciting, thrilling. There's such an openness. There's a
mm,
great camaraderie to all the winemaking, promoting winemakers of color, promoting women. You mentioned some great wines from the Breda Kloof,
yeah.
Elisma, who makes wine at Olifantsberg. Such
Uh-huh.
great wines. So it's really quite a thrilling place, in comparison to maybe some other new world
Mm,
areas and even old world areas where there might be a little bit more of the status quo, and
mm,
there's just a great movement.
mm,
You mentioned a bit about the that French sort of connection that we have, and of course the main sort of focus here. And I know Spier, we'll talk about Spier's wider range a bit later, but the
mm,
focus I really want to go here into is, of course, because of the 100-year celebration, the century celebration of the creation of Pinotage,
mm,
which is inherently South African. It's really a part of your identity in
mm,
terms of grape growing and winemaking. And of course, that story started in 1925 with Professor Abraham Isaac Perold,
mhm.
who successfully crosses Pinot Noir Sanso, forgets about it, and then it gets kind of resuscitated by, I think it was C.G. Torondaval, and
Yes.
then it begins, right? So we start to get plantations in the middle of the 20th century. We're celebrating 100 years, but really plantations, we're celebrating something like, is it like 70 years, 60, 70 years? Would that be right?
Yeah, I'd say from 1957. It's almost again 300 years after the first grapes, but yeah,
Yeah.
about 1957.
Yeah. And
The first commercial wine, I think, was, I understand corrected, but I think it's 1959 from Lanzarote. I've tasted that wine, and it's in half bottles, 500 mils.
yeah.
And the wines are still, they're pretty alive. Eh? It reminds me a lot actually of a type of Chateauneuf from the 50s.
Okay.
It's
Interesting.
got that touch of so what I'm looking for. It's got that touch of banana like Grenache has when it's young.
Yeah.
I've had a 57 Chateauneuf de Pape also in Canada. Sorry for
Okay.
my Afrikaans. In Canada, and it reminded me a lot actually of that Lanzarote Pinotage. Back then, the style was a lot lighter, much more acidic.
Mm,
Back then, malolactic fermentation wasn't done on red wines yet, so the wines
mm,
were quite primary,
mm.
and they aged beautifully, beautifully.
Would you be so kind to share your experience of Pinotage in the vineyard to begin with?
Yeah, I think as a varietal, we don't have that many clones. I think there's only 2 clones of Pinotage, which makes it quite narrow from a selection point of view. Um, and then as a plant, it's quite resilient. I mean, during the droughts of 2015 to 2019, there were 2 grapes that stood out head above shoulders above the other grape varieties, and that's Pinotage and Cab Sav. So
Mhm.
everyone was thinking Grenache or their own varietals that can be more resilient against water, reduced water,
Mm.
but they actually suffered quite a bit. So Pinotage and Cab was the most stable with crop size and also quality. Of course, Pinotage had a lot more tannin during that time because the berries were a lot smaller.
Mm.
So the skin was thicker and the tannin content was higher. But from a grape growing point of view, it grows quite easily, grows quite upright, the shoots. It is fairly resistant to, not resistant, but it doesn't get it's not as susceptible to powdery mildew or downy mildew, though it does get it, but it's not as, I think it's more adapted now to our conditions than if you bring Pinot Noir now back to South Africa. It's much more adapted. And yeah, it can crop. It can crop 20, 25 tons per hectare, and then give you a Sangiovese style wine, which is quite light, but with firm tannins, some acidity. And I can give you a wine that crops at 4 or 5 tons per hectare from a bush vine, and then gives you quite a square wine, I would say, quite tannic and quite full-bodied. But that wine can age really well. That's probably a wine that you should only look at drinking 8 to 10 years from vintage. And that's often also the misconception, if I just jump quickly to the market, is that Pinotage is fruity wines, fruity everyday wines. It is that, yes, but it can also be some of those wines that you forget about for 25 years and then open it up. Then coming back to the vineyards, it's quite adaptable to the terroir. It can grow in sandy soils. It can grow in more rocky, more clay soils. People like to believe that it loves hot climate. Most grapes will be much more happier when the climate is more sort of temperate. So we find that with the styles that we make, the Pinotage that grows closest to the ocean gives us much more of that elegance that Pinotage can possess. And then the warmer it is, the more sort of full-bodied, almost like that Shiraz, Syrah type of conversation where Shiraz is big and bold and jammy type of thing. And then Syrah is a little more elegant, peppery, more sinewy. Pinotage is that type of varietal where the closer you are to the ocean, the more influence there is on the style. And then bringing that into the winery is, you have to know that you cannot make a plummy, jammy style. You can, but you shouldn't, from a vineyard that's close to the coast. There, it's more about the elegance, the finesse, the powderiness of the tannin, the retention of the acidity, because it's also varietal that's got very high malic acid. So your total acidity drops quite a bit during the processing. I don't know how deep we want to go into the chemistry of Pinotage, but
so you're talking about your care with the grape is making sure that it has enough acidity from the vineyard. Yeah.
So there, I mean, that's climate. So because it's got a very short shoot length, we're not in the Rhine Valley here from Germany where you want 1.2 meter shoot lengths because you need leaves to give you sugar. South Africa, we don't have a problem with sugar accumulation. Our challenge with vineyards are very often that it accumulates sugar too fast, and then the phenolics doesn't catch up. So, and this is what we've seen with Pinotage. So you can pick Pinotage at 23 bricks, then you'll have a light wine that's got quite some sort of a green tannin, but because the fruit profile of Pinotage is not like Cab where it's got pyrazines, it'll never show you greenness, but the tannin will be harsh and green. That's very often what put people off of Pinotage, and then people try to obscure it with oak, with a high toast oak. But over time, that sort of greenness still comes through. So we've learned, and thanks to the British public, actually, we've learned to ferment warmer with Pinotage to get rid of that banana and sort of reductive flavors, burnt rubber characteristics. And we've also learned that we can pick a lot riper because we want the tannin to ripen. So if you've got this big canopy on Pinotage, you're in trouble. Then you're going to have sugar accumulation too fast. Your tannins will be bitter and green because they're not ripened. The pips is not ripe. So we often, if you've got water, we've got irrigation. We will have it at sort of 70% phenolic ripeness. And then the sugar accumulation would be around 26 bricks, 26 and a half. Then we will irrigate that vineyard. And then we will wait 7 days, and then we will pick. Because the water will dilute the sugar in the plant, in the fruit, and it allows the phenolics to catch up. So it's a vineyard trick if you've got irrigation. If you don't have it, then you have to wait. And then you typically sit with the alcohols that's out of whack. It's too high.
It's really fascinating. You should mention that because I was in Jumia in eastern Spain, where
Right.
they deal in monastrell, and
Yeah.
it's actually something. If they have a bit of rain, it's all old bush vines there, right?
Yeah.
There's very little irrigation. But if it rains in those so that week leading up to harvest, they see that as a massive bonus.
Our best vintages from South Africa comes from years where there's rain in the harvest.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want an inch of rain, but there's half an inch or a quarter inch in that week leading up to harvest. It's brilliant.
Johan, I want to pick up on a point you mentioned that is really interesting around. You said that thanks to the British public, with feedback coming from them around Pinotage, that you opted to ferment at higher temperatures in order to reduce sort of those reductive compounds and so on. I heard from the Pinotage Association that those kind of like spray painty characters, kerosene, tar, rubber, and so on, may develop with Pinotage when water stress is very high in the vineyard, and then high temperatures combined with that. But then they also mention in some of their literature it's because of fermenting too high with Pinotage. So are you just increasing it a little bit? What's the science behind that? Because it's a little bit conflicting to what the association say.
It depends on when that was printed. I'm going back now to 1992. So in 1992, we fermented Pinotage. It ferments very fast. The varietal doesn't struggle to ferment because it's got really high assimilable nitrogen because it's an early ripener. So you still have a lot of that in the plant, in the grapes. But so back then we fermented very cold because the industry was based on white wine production. Red wine production was, I think, 15 or 20% of the total plantings. And then also very sort of more reductive winemaking back then. So we always kept oxygen away from wine. So, and this is my take as a winemaker coming through the ages, working at a co-op and seeing how co-ops handle wine, which is most of the wine that hits the supermarket shelf. It's coming from that sort of area. And then learning how to adjust with feedback from the British market. So back then, the comments that you just said, that comments were isoacetate or acetone, and sort of a rusty nail characteristic, which is a reductive note, almost like a rusticness that you'll find in some European wines as well. Then there was the burnt rubber, the leafiness, the sort of weediness that was in wine. So that resulted from too early picking, which I was referring to the green tannin in the pips. And now you ferment green at a very high temperature, and it doesn't blow off. So it becomes part of the wine. And then if you use a reductive winemaking techniques after that, the wine just keeps on closing down.
Yeah.
And then when it hits the market, with scientific winemaking, you want your sulfur levels at X and Y for export. It just adds to the insult to injury. So we've learned from feedback from the British public and the market that we need the wine to be more open. And to get it more open, we were maybe fermenting at 22 degrees. Now we went up to 26 to 28 degrees Celsius. So that in a border varietal, that gets rid of greenness. But this grape doesn't contain pyrazine. But there you need to manage the rate of fermentation. So wineries like Kanonkop or Beyersdorf will tell you they ferment 4 days on the skins, then they're done. That's the fermentation window. I, as a winemaker for Pinotage, would like to stretch that window as long as possible. I'll be on the skins for 12 days, even up to 18 days, handling it more like a cab or a Merlot. Not necessarily cold soaking, but just fermenting at between 23 and 25 degrees Celsius. Then you have a much more elegant product. And then introduce oxygen during the fermentation. Then you get rid of the acetone characteristics. And then you shouldn't start with green fruit to begin with. So make sure that the phenolics are right. But we've come a long way since 92, I agree, 100%. And the association, like anyone in South Africa, wants to have an explanation for what we've got in the bottle. But you also remember it's the second youngest grape in the world of which wine is made commercially. So everyone is learning a lot as we go along.
when I first started my school, I definitely wasn't the biggest fan of Pinotage because a lot of it coming into the UK, and this is 2006, 7, 8, it wasn't of as great a quality as it is today. And I was much younger. I took that opinionated view and I was like, oh, Pinotage is just not that great. But I think one of the greatest things we can do as someone who enjoys wine and critiques wine as well is that you've got to keep your mind open. And there is the amount that you guys have adapted around Pinotage, around many varieties, not just Pinotage, but because we're focusing on Pinotage, it's been brilliant because there are some Pinotage which is pretty much reminiscent of Pinot Noir. There are some that are very much like Grenache, as you mentioned. They've got like a pepperiness to them. There are floral examples. David and Nadia make some phenomenal expressions. That lovely juiciness. I mentioned Olifantsberg, and then all the way up to your Ricks, your Cannon Cops, and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to ask you about the clone thing you mentioned. So I've written down so much here, Johan. You're a font of knowledge. Few clones of Pinotage. Is there work on adapting some of these clones now that there's 100 years of history, or are we still in the early stages and we don't know any more than that?
I think we're still in the early stages. And again, I guess it's who you speak to here about the people's knowledge in the background. But here's an example of this type of evolution, natural evolution. So we've compared South African clones of grapes that we've got from France that's got the same clone name. And it was originally the same clone. And then after being in South Africa for quite some time, the grapes have now adjusted and adapted, which is called epigenetics. So plant has adjusted to its environment, and now the expressions of the clone is different to the original clone that was brought from Hermitage, that was brought from Burgundy. So as an example. So I heard this from the horse's mouth, what I was about to tell you last night from Bayer Streeter.
Okay.
We were at the same auction, school auction, and he was telling it from behind a podium. So it's official.
Okay, cool.
That Pinot Fin clone was the original clone back then, but that clone doesn't share the same identity as the original clone from Burgundy today because of epigenetics.
Yeah.
So if you go to the old blocks from the 1957, which still exists on the Bellevue farm in Stellenbosch, if you take cuttings from that might be the original clone still.
Yeah.
But if you take cuttings that was planted in the 80s or 90s, there is definitely clonal selection and clonal work being done in the background, but it's not as identifiable yet.
That's what I was getting at. That's what I was getting at, because of the mutations that happen when they are taken from Bellevue and then they are put elsewhere. Of course, through decades, and we haven't had centuries yet, but certainly it happens. Of course, our mutations. So it'd be interesting to know if anybody is cataloging that and then planting it in mother blocks and so on. That would be
no, there's definitely work being done at VTTech and SA Wine in the background. And I mean, with what we do as at Spier is we, over the many vineyards that we've got access to, it's not always just a terroir. Sometimes that plant has got something different. Right. So we will, if those plants are virus free, then we will use those plants to propagate vineyards from, like a Pinotage block that we've uprooted, which is close to the. I mean, if you look at this picture, it's about 6 kilometers from the coast. So that's where the first vineyard sits from being built out from the high water mark. And that's Sauvignon Blanc territory, and we planted that block of Pinotage there. We uprooted it after 25 years. And we took those shoots to create the new vines that were virus-free. So it takes time to get that amount of plants from that. But we believe that vineyards has adjusted to that area. We will want to plant the same vineyards there again.
Fantastic.
So that's very old school thinking. It's European, Italian thinking, Italian winemaking thinking.
Yep.
But that's where we are.
But this is what I'd love everybody at home to understand, is that, Pinotage is although it is now very much symbolic of South Africa, it's still at an embryonic stage in comparison to like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, which have had millennia to evolve.
Yeah.
Johan, that goes on to what you were mentioning. Can you please link now into Pinotage, where you grow it? You just mentioned a bit of it. So, and also maybe how that connects to the range of Pinotage that you produce.
Good. Yes. So I'll start with that quickly. So the range of Pinotage that we produce is the 21 Gables Pinotage, which is our sort of flagship Pinotage. That's Stellenbosch based. Yeah, I think you've got the 2017 vintage there.
Yep.
So that's Pinotage based. It's actually on this picture that we've got in the background here. And that's this vineyard I was just speaking about, which we've uprooted since, but we've taken the plantings or the cuttings to make new plants. So that is a granitic outcrop 6 kilometers from the high water mark. It's about, I think it's 80 meters above sea level. So it's not a very big sort of altitude. And it's fairly flat. The aspect is it's quite flat. The under vine conditions is, as I said, it's decomposed granite. And there's lots of ferricrete in the soil. So the coffee clip soils that we refer to as South Africans.
Yep.
Which means the ferrous content in the soil is slightly high. So I as a winemaker have learned this, I didn't know it back then, but I've learned it since, that you need to look at the ferrous component in your juice, because you get enzymatic oxidation from too much iron in your juice or too much iron in your wine. So
that's really interesting, because there's been a few studies on this now, certainly with volcanic wines. I know they're doing studies in Etna about this and that high iron content and the oxidizing nature of it. And do you find that can translate into a wine that becomes more savory and oxidative? Is it something that is transparent from what it does to your juice and what it does to the final style of the wine?
Yeah, so I think what it transpires to the palate is it's flatter, as you say, in the fruit. So it's not as floral, sort of purple fruit. It's much more berry fruit, but it's also more tart. So
Right.
you lose some of that fruit. The French call this thing fructosity, but the fruit sweetness that Pinotage possesses, you lose some of that as the wine ages. Whereas vineyards that's not planted in this ferrous type of soil doesn't lose that fruit sweetness.
Right.
So for me, I like this Pinotage because it lacks that. So it doesn't present 100% like a Pinotage. It presents like a well-made wine, which reminds you of Pinotage, but can also remind you of a good Merlot. It can also remind you of a Grenache, although it's got the tannin structure of Pinotage, but the flavor profile doesn't scream that from the rooftop. So for me, it's a much more complex wine. It gave us that slightly more savory tart fruitiness to the wine, which for me is a bit more complex.
Yeah.
So that's the 21 Gables. And then the next vineyard the next one is the Seaward range, which it's our made-up word for looking towards the ocean, looking towards the sea for inspiration.
Yep.
And that's a climatic influence. So it's this vineyard, it's 2 blocks of vineyard. One block sits on the Helderberg farm where this photo was taken from.
Right.
Still 6 kilometers from the ocean, but now we've got altitude of 180 to 200 meters above sea level at a west-northwesterly facing aspect. That means it's a hot aspect, but because we're so high above the sea level, the oceanic winds runs between 200 and 400 meters above sea level. So it's a lot cooler in that vineyard. So the mitigating effect of the wind or the ocean currents carrying the cool winds in offsets the west-northwesterly facing slope. So you have longer hang time. It means your phenolic ripeness it's more in tune. You have slightly more elegant fruit expression, so it's not these big fruit bombs.
Yep.
That's one half of the wine, and the other half is further inland in Stellenbosch, also at about 100 meters above sea level, fairly flat aspect, but it still gets sort of southeasterly wind drifting over that vineyard. This one is slightly more sort of robust, this block, but I try not to extract it that hard, so you don't extract everything that the grape has got, because the grapes has a lot.
Right.
And then I blend those two together to make something I think that's a little bit more European in style, where it's slightly more elegant, slightly more floral. and more sort of red fruit characteristics. I'm not a very big fan of the plumminess that Pinotage can possess.
Yeah.
I like the more berry expression of it. That's the second one, the Seaward. And then the last one is the signature range, which is our sort of everyday drinking range, where I focus more on the style of Pinotage as opposed to just the terroir. So yeah, it can be on sandy soils, it can be on rocky outcrops, but not the lower yielding fruit. This is more for me about having that red fruit, that playful element that Pinotage possesses.
Yeah.
So it's more for lighter style of drinking. Still has an alcohol of 13.5 to 14, but much less tannin, slightly more fruity. Very subtle oak use in the background. It's just for support. Yeah, just to show a more playful side of Pinotage.
I think you just mentioned there about a very careful amount of oak as well. I think that's been another massive learning curve, isn't it? Where it's the same as Pinot. You can't go over the top with it.
No. Everyone thinks Pinotage is such a robust grape. It is a robust grape, but it's a delicate wine.
Yeah.
And you can overpower it. And the moment you use it in blends, we haven't spoken about blendings with Pinotage, but Pinotage as a blender is a great component, but it can very quickly dominate the blend. So
Okay.
the Cape blends we speak about, 30 to 70% must contain Pinotage, and Pinotage must be the dominant varietal. But you can blend it with anything, Bordeaux style or Rhone style, or you can blend it with anything. At the moment, you have a Pinotage that's already very plummy or very extracted. It's a bit sometimes like Petit Verdot. It just consumes everything that you blend with it.
Interesting.
And then you sometimes sit with a rustic wine after that. So there you must also, for me, match when you blend with Pinotage, because it's got a very lopsided sort of palate. A lot of the weight of the wine sits in the front of your palate. You want to, with oak, you can stretch it, and with time, you can stretch it to the back with oxygen as well. But when you blend with Pinotage, you want to look at the grape varieties that can pull the focus of the wine further towards the middle and more towards the back of the palate. And I think that's very often where people struggle with Pinotage, because it's got such a heavy presence in the front of your palate.
Yeah.
People lose interest. It doesn't have a finish, they would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's
yeah.
just all up front and nothing
Yes.
in between. Yeah. Now, what's the future for this really fascinating variety?
I think let's start by eliminating. I think they over-extracted star. That ship has sailed. I think for some good reasons for certain styles.
Yep.
And the lightness, fruit lightness, color lightness, lightness in style of body, that I think seems to be a very prevalent sort of denominator these days. Not just alcohol. People looking for styles that's more, I would call it day drinking wines, where you can, where the wine is not overbearing. So the tannin is seamless. There's some acidity. There's freshness. I think that is what the grape is moving towards. It'll always have a fruit sweetness, because it's the inherent characteristic of Pinotage and Chenin Blanc, is to have that fruit sweetness.
Yep.
So the savoriness comes from aging, or maybe how you pick early and then you don't extract that much, but you use a lot of oxygen. There's these ways to get that type of characteristic into your wine. But I think the wine is moving more towards lighter and brighter styles. And the tannins need to be denser, because Pinotage has got a very grainy tannin. It's almost like
Too rustic.
yeah, rustic. But if you compare it, if you put take a vial or a vase, and you put in pebbles, quartz pebbles, that's almost like the Pinotage structure of tannin. And then you add clay and you shake it, and that becomes more dense. That's your oak tannin or French oak tannin.
Right.
Then you add maybe a finer layer of clay or porcelain, and you shake it, and that now presents a much more denser, rounded feel of the same thing. And that sort of porcelain clay is more like your Hungarian oak tannin, which is slightly sweet, even finer in texture than French oak. So if you with the help of oxygen and time, you can compress this and densify the tannin of Pinotage. Then it's also so that it's fine like Pinot Noir, where it's got that sort of velvetiness, but it's got that iron fist in the velvet glove hiding there.
Mhm.
But nice Pinot Noirs, when you've sipped it, there is this subtle dryness washing from the back, and that for me is the root for Pinotage. Not to be Pinot Noir, but to be more stylistically fine, honed,
Right. Right.
almost to show more elegant side of it.
And do you think there's going to be more discussion with grape growers and producers of terroir with Pinotage? Because I'm starting to hear a bit more about that now. And of course, you talked about, we had a good discussion around sort of the ferricrete, the iron sort of influence. Is this something which is people are talking about more openly now with Pinotage?
I mean, most people work with what they've got to begin with, because not everyone has access to that type of terroirs or different soil types. There's a lot of conversation always when we are at Pinotage functions or discussing Pinotage about how we approach the wine in making it. Growing it, the cards are dealt. You must play the hand you've got.
Right.
So lower extraction, less extraction, slower ferments, where you really, it's like this racehorse that has to run 15 furlong. You can't let it sprint the whole time. So you have to hold it back a bit. So, and that's what I was referring to earlier, not taking everything that the grape has got, but just enough so you can make a really stylish wine that's elegant and poised and precise. So there's a lot of winemaking talk. I mean, there's two camps. There's people that think Pinotage must be rich and extracted, and then there's the people that say no. We think it must be more perfumey and more elegant.
But it can be all of those, which is the great thing.
It can, and that's the bloody thing. It can, and then you can have the Cinsault qualities coming out of it from a warmer climate, where's fruit and spice, and then you can have the Pinot Noir qualities coming from the coastal areas, which is more floral and spice. But yeah, it's to strike that balance, and to have a house style. I think it's nice for people to acknowledge or to recognize. But it's still a natural product. The climate still varies from one vintage to the next.
Yeah.
You can have that unseasonal rain, which you didn't plan for, or you don't have it, and then your style deviates a little. So it's to have an open mind, but to have a target in mind, not just to go guns blazing, extract, and hope for the best.
And areas to watch. We know, of course, Stellenbosch does it very well. Paarl does it quite well. Is there an area to specifically watch in your eyes?
So the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley for me makes that already. Wellhaven and the brands up that way makes that sort of more elegant style of Pinot Noir already.
Yeah.
Which I think I think the British public might like that, because it's much more likened to Pinot Noir there.
Yeah.
Bot River, I mean, they get unseasonal rain during the summer. The Breeder Curve is doing interesting things. Huh? They've got a massive vineyards there, so they can trial and play.
Yep.
You've mentioned some of these names, Olifantsberg and the likes.
Yep.
And I mean, a couple of years ago, we said we must move east with vineyard plantings because the climate is changing. We're having less winter rainfall, and the summer rainfall might be beneficial. But this is conversations that we've had in the drought. And when the drought is broken, we still need this very, very cool influence from the Atlantic coast, which is the cold water. If you go into the south coast, it's hot water, it's the Indian Ocean. Completely different environment, much more humidity, gives you a different wine. You need something with acidity there, higher acidity, like the Greek varietals maybe.
And then there's nothing more evident than Cape Agulhas, right? When you're down there and you step foot on the western side and it's cold, and you step foot on the eastern side of that and it's warm. It's just fascinating, that effect of the ocean.
So that tannin management in the future, I think, will be very important. Climatically, I think we're all right. Pinotage adapts quite fast. As long as we've got water for irrigation, we can do many things. But yeah, I'd say the Hemel-en-Aarde, the cooler regions, cooler climatically.
Yep.
And then the big thing, I must add this, and this is something that we work with very hard in the industry, is replanting. Old vines are not always great vines. Sometimes they're just old. So if you've got a site which is probably better suited for another grape variety, then, I mean, take the emotional decision and get rid of the vineyard and start over. And it's not cheap these days to plant vineyard. It's quite expensive. So planting the wrong varietal again on that soil will be very costly in the future. So I think the site selections, as you mentioned before, will become much more important now, so that when you plant a block of vineyard, that it yields the fruit that it has to for that style of wine consistently over 25 to 30 years.
And Johan,
Because
is the number of Pinotage, are we seeing a decrease in vineyards, an increase in vineyards? What do you think?
now, so Pinotage as a varietal in South Africa has increased. I think in the last 10 years, it was the varietal that grew the fastest, but now it's stable. But the important thing for me when I look at it as a producer for the future is you want to see the age distribution of the vineyards. What portion of the grapes are younger than 15 years? What portion of the grapes are older than 15 years? So Pinotage has got one of the healthiest distributions. Most of the vineyards are under 15 years of age, which means there's constant sort of evolution in the style of the wine also. Young wines gives you fruity, easy drinking wines. Older vineyards gives you more complex wines. It's got finer tannins naturally. But through your ranges and through your price points and through your styles, you want to have access to that variables of age.
Fantastic. Well, great. What a great discussion there about Pinotage. And thank you so much. Could you, Spier, what kind of a visitors attraction is it? What do you have? Restaurants, hotel, etc. Could you explain a bit about that, opening times and so on?
Right. So Spier, very conveniently situated about 30 minutes from the airport, Cape Town International Airport. It's I think it's a third or fourth winery as you come into the Stellenbosch winelands, if you come on that road. It's a big property. It's a 600-hectare property. So Jimmy mentioned taking a Segway. That's the quickest way to get around the farm if you want to see a lot very fast.
Just make sure you're not drinking too much the night before.
Yeah, don't. Yeah, be sober. But when you come and set foot on the property, it's very spacious, beautiful gardens. We got 2 restaurants that's operational the whole time, and then we've got manor house, so eating rooms where you can book private dinners or with a winemaker and the likes. We got obviously the wine shop where you really tranquil setting on a dam where you can sit and look at the surroundings, birds, sit and drink wine or taste wine. And then we got a hotel to stay. You come to the hotel. It's a 80-bedroom hotel. We just refurbished it. It was built initially in 1997, I think, and it's had its the most recent refurb we opened up in March. It's a country style hotel, country style retreat hotel, if I can call it that. So it's quite luxurious. We got the restaurant in the hotel, which is fine dining with wine linked to every meal, or you can just have a gastronomic experience in the hotel. So you can spend a day easily at Spier and not be bored. There's enough to do here. There's enough to see. And then you also see the heart and soul of Spier. It's easy to talk about it over a screen or over a radio podcast or whatever, but it's when you're here, you'll see the people with their happy, smiley faces. Here's one of those places where South Africa comes alive.
Yeah.
Everyone is here. So you can see and you can taste and you can smell and you can live.
I completely agree, because really strangely, last time I was there, I had a phenomenal experience. I stayed. It was absolutely wonderful. A place where a lot of people gravitate towards. It's very well known. It's very well run. Beautiful rooms to stay in. Great food, great wine, great people. So really great. Thank you so much, Johan, for your time. Very much looking forward to seeing you as well. So any closing words before you say goodbye?
Yeah, I think we're still on the topic of Pinotage. I've heard I've been very fortunate to travel the world quite well, and I've been in really great tastings. And then sitting in a tasting in the Medoc in France, having first growth wines and some faulty wines, which we had to fix, which was first growth wines. But sitting there and just being overwhelmed by history, one. And being fortunate to drink those wines too, and then stepping out just to take a minute and then seeing a plaque on the wall by a gentleman called Salvador Dali that said, once you know how to taste wine, you will never drink wine again, but discover secrets. And this is where I want to leave the Pinotage drinker and the person that doesn't drink Pinotage is, do not judge it just for the first or second time that you've had it. Try more of it and try to find the soul of the wine. See if you can taste through all the fruit and the wood and everything and see the intent of the winemaker behind it. And does it appeal to you? Because admittedly, not every wine appeals to every person. Doesn't matter what the variety.
Yeah.
And then when you come to South Africa, come with an open palate, not with an open mind. The mind comes with a plane. It opens up anyway. But come with an open palate. Don't expect Malbec from Argentina or don't expect Simeon from East Coast Australia. Come here with a blank expectation list and fill it in as you go. It's an amazing country and our wines are perceived as they are, but sometimes wrong. Come here to the address of South African wine and experience it firsthand.
Absolutely agree. And many of my regulars through my wine school, many of my followers know that I have a slight unhealthy obsession with South Africa. So, it's
because you've been here
too many times, but I'm more than happy to keep coming back. Yeah, it's my most visited New World country. Sorry to say that, but to group it like that, if you compare it to the others, it is, and there's reasons for that, and we've just listed many of them. So thank you so much, Johan, for your time. I look forward to seeing you soon, and cheers.
Cheers, Jimmy. Everyone, thanks for visiting us. Bye.
Bye.